Hey there, huggers. Thanks for tuning back in. We got another one of these videos with Mr. Dahl. Today happens to be a very happy day. In case anybody missed it, Super Bowl just finished up. And once again, Tom Brady was in the Super Bowl, which was his 10th appearance. And it happens to be a victory, nonetheless, for him again, which brings his grand total of Super Bowls to 7, which means he is more successful than any NFL football team of in the world. So, yeah, Tom Brady. By far the best quarterback of all time. Okay, back to what we need to actually discuss today is how does agriculture make an impact on the cultural landscape? So when you think about it, what is it? How does agriculture, fields, farms shape our cultural landscape, and how does it shape how people live? So that's two things we're going to talk about and focus on today. So when you think about an airplane, you're in an airplane, you're flying around, you're looking down. You see crop circles or you see squares or you see absolutely nothing. Well, what you're seeing is what's known as cadastral systems. They're land surveys. So it's a way to divide up. When you survey the land, you're figuring out how to organize it, structure it, define it, and divide it. So there's 3 ways that our land has been divided up. The first one is township and range. And this is what we see in America. This is because of the Homestead Act when we're trying to get settlers to move west. It's based on a grid system. It's geometric boundaries for the most part, and it usually creates like 1 square mile sections. It's like why many of our cities are built in a square or a rectangle, and the roads are like make intersections, straight intersections. That's a grid system. It was based off of what's known as a township and range. So when you're flying around an airplane and you see like those checkerboard looking agricultural landscape below the airplane, that is an area that's going by the Homestead Act, which is set up townships and range based off of mile coordinates. All right. Literally, you got to take mile coordinates after every five years of inheriting the land. You could claim another 160 acres of unsettled land. It was a way for America to settle land before Mexico or France could invade America. All right. The next way of describing how agriculture is divided up is what's known as the metes and bounds. This is more erratic. It's more irregular. But what they use is some type of pre-established boundary, typically a river or water feature, but sometimes you could use a mountain range. But typically metes and bounds is just something that's demarked or marked by a river or mountain or humans, either as a road, a chain link fence, and it's a little more of an irregular parcel of land. And likely, besides township and range, the next easiest to see on the landscape is what's known as the long lot survey system. Think of it as really long, narrow rectangles. This is found in Louisiana and parts of the Southeast where France had initially controlled parts of America. I think of areas where the Louisiana Purchase involved. It divided land into narrow parcels stretching back from either a river, a road, or a canal. The reason for this was because one of the first ways to move agriculture products was via roads or rivers. Well, still today is roads and rivers, but what happened is rivers became the most important because it was the most efficient before the invention of motors and eventually the combine and the semi-truck. So rivers, every farmer wanted to gain access to, and farmers would actually fight each other for access to rivers. So the long lot survey system gave you long, narrow pieces of land, but it allowed many farmers to then have access to the river. All right, so that was known as a long lot survey system. I'll show you what this looks like. Here's a map that shows you everywhere in yellow, follows the township and range or the rectangular grid system, so clearly it's the most common. The red is the long lot. It's kind of Texas, Louisiana, where Louisiana Purchase was focused on. And then where there's a little more rivers and more mountainous areas, it makes sense to use the metes and bounds survey system that initially settled the eastern side of the United States. Here you can see a square. When you look out in the distance, you can see these squares making up what's known as sections. It's usually every 6 by 6 miles is a section. This is why many of our rural towns are in a square. The township and range built that and established that for as we settled. In the background, you notice all those little white buildings? Those are farms. Those are what's known as dispersed settlements, dispersed farms. And everywhere around that farm, typically, like if you have this farmer here, they own the land around it. That's exactly what a dispersed settlement is, with the intention of being able to control land around your homestead. This is an example of a long lot survey system. Here you have the road or the river. It's located along this kind of edge of the town. This right here is making sure that every farmer has access to the roads. So these long lots is simply making sure that a farmer always has connections to an escape route. All right, and this ultimately right here in France, this is a picture of a long lot survey system in France. These little shrub rows or tree rows is also where we saw the fighting of the trench warfare, or what's known as the stalemate or the no man's land that was being fought during World War I. So agriculture actually impacted World War I, being one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Last thing here that we talk about now is how does agriculture impact where people live? Well, there's these different types of villages, or what we refer to as towns. Linear village is kind of a village that's built alongside a river or a hill, so it's built more in a line. It also is used to offer protection. You built it on the side of a mountain or a side of a hill or a side of a river, so you can only be attacked from one side. It also conserves your arable land because if you build it on the side of a mountain or in a line, you're not taking up as much farmable land. Most agriculture villages are nucleated. So think of our towns. All of our towns are nucleated within a small town, like if you're talking about Janesville or talking about Lake Crystal or you're talking about Cleveland, you have a small town, and then around it is your farmland. That's known as a cluster or nucleated village. A round village is no longer used in the world besides in the Aborigines of Australia or Amazon rainforest or the outback of Australia, I should say. Whereas a walled village is historically what we see in Europe. Back when the empires established fortified walls, and you had the knights and the kings and queens built walls to kind of keep their most prestigious nobles safe. And then you also had what's known as a dispersed village, which is what's the most common rural form of settlements in America. We saw these little farmers, these little farm families that would basically build a house every mile apart from each other. And that was known as a dispersed village. And we'll see some of these pictures now. So this right here is a round village. It just shows you how it's built to ultimately keep livestock in some of our poorest areas of the world, predominantly in like Africa and Australia and parts of the Amazon rainforest in South America. This right here is a walled village. You'll see these in very ancient historic cities in Europe that basically have walls. And as they kept building and spreading, there'd be multiple layers of walls that was ultimately built to keep invaders out, like the Vikings out of parts of England and Germany. They'd have walled villages. This is an example of a nucleated town. So this would just be a least developed nucleated town. Mankato would be nucleated as well, but we would be a developed nucleated village. This right here is an undeveloped nucleated village. Okay, so nucleated villages are the most common form of settlement patterns, and yet for farmers in America, they're not nucleated, they're dispersed. So it's a little different here in America. This is common practice in America, where we see farmers really spread out from each other and live in more of a secluded area. All right, so there's just kind of a picture of what each looks like. Linear is a line, cluster, think of it as compact. Grid, you would see like coordinates, and then clearly that would be describing the villages that we've learned. At this point, you should watch my video here and watch a little short 2-minute video of Mr. Sin, and you'll be good to go. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.